Hey everybody, so today I'm going to be doing a character examination for Theon Greyjoy, and so just fair warning, spoiler alert for the entire show. I will be focusing on the show and not the books. I do know that the books kind of like diverge away from like the show in terms of like what happens to this character, but I'm going to be focusing entirely on the show for this examination. And so just to start off, I'm going to kind of go through Theon's kind of story and where I feel he becomes such an interesting character, because I actually think that Theon is a character that's really easy to overlook, just because there's so many well done characters in Game of Thrones. But he's actually one of the most dynamic characters in the series in terms of how he is perceived by the audience, at least in my opinion. And so just to start off, Theon is the heir to the Iron Island, but very young, when he was very young, his father, Balon Greyjoy, basically had a rebellion against the Seven Kingdoms and wanted to basically separate the Iron Islands from Westeros. And he was squashed. It did not go very well at all. And Theon's two older brothers, who were, set to take the Iron Islands before him, they were killed in the battle. And then Theon, being Balon's last living heir, was captured by Ned Stark, and then Ned Stark said, "If you try and rebel again, I'll kill your kid." I always thought that that was one of the most out of character moments for Ned Stark. It doesn't happen actually on screen, but it is part of the story. That is what Ned Stark. That's why he took Theon. But that's beside the point. And so basically, he takes Theon and treats him as his ward. But it does really set up this element that while Ned treats Theon pretty good and probably better than like 99% of people would treat someone like Theon, he is still a prisoner. He is a prisoner at Winterfell, and he really internalizes that. And he definitely, similar to Jon Snow, never fully feels welcome at Winterfell. This has some huge ramifications later. But so he grows up at Winterfell and becomes really good friends with Robb Stark. They essentially think of each other as brothers. This is something that Theon tries to confirm with Robb at several points, because it is something where he feels really like an outsider. And so then, yada yada yada. Robb Stark, Ned is taken to King's Landing. He's beheaded. I just want to focus on Theon, but to move the story forward, Ned's killed. Robb leads the North in a rebellion against the South. And Theon offers a suggestion that he will go to his father in the Iron Islands and get their support to help with Robb Stark. Everyone basically says that this is a terrible idea because people don't really trust people from the Iron Islands, and justifiably so. They're really, really scummy people, at least most of the ones that we're introduced to. But Theon convinces Robb that this is a good idea, and so he goes and is basically turned away from his father and treated just terribly, which is like just the opposite. I mean, this is something that Theon has been like dreaming about going home for like a long time, because he's always been proud of being Ironborn, even though he like hadn't been there since he was young. So when he gets to see his father, and his father basically is like, "Oh, they made you a sissy," because the Ironborn are very tough people. This is really difficult for Theon, and he basically almost immediately turns on the Starks. Because when Balon says that he wants to basically use this opportunity while the North is at war with the South to invade the North, and like basically, I don't know what the end game was, but that was their goal, is to kind of take over the North and hopefully separate a little bit. And so Theon is given like a crew of a very, very small crew, especially one that he does not believe fits who he is. Like, he is, I guess, the rightful heir to the Sea Salt throne, which is, Balon Greyjoy, head of the Iron Islands. But Balon basically says, "Your sister Yara, she's gonna get it. She's so much more deserving of it than you." And Theon, that really ticks Theon off at first, and so he decides it's a great idea to go to Winterfell and basically take Winterfell. And this is, his home. All the people that think that they can trust him are there. And keep in mind, these are the people who stayed behind and didn't go fighting. So these are like, the women, the older people, the children. These are who is left behind at Winterfell. And Theon takes his little band of misfits, and they they take Winterfell in a very ugly, hard to watch. They easily take it because like all the fighting men are gone. And there's this horrific interaction between Theon and Sir Roderick, who is the Master of Arms at Winterfell. And Sir Roderick is furious at Theon for trying to take Winterfell, and he spits in Theon's face. And one of Theon's kind of crewmates tells him, he needs to pay the iron price, which means you need to execute him. And so Theon takes his sword and executes someone who has trained him since he was a little kid, and it is just one of the it's a such a hard scene to watch because Theon like isn't able to like take his head off with one swing. He like does it multiple times, and it's just awful. And you are just so angry as a viewer at Theon right here. You are so angry at him. Um and this is just the beginning of your anger for Theon. So he's already a traitor. He kills someone who had trained him since he was a little kid. And then so Bran and Rickon, they are the two remaining Starks at Winterfell. They escape. They escape from Winterfell with the help of Asha Grey, or not Asha. Her name, yeah, no, her name's Asha. The wildling that Winterfell that was at Winterfell. They escape, and Theon goes hunting for them, and he can't find them. But we, as the viewer, don't know this. And he basically makes this big presentation at Winterfell after claiming that he did find Bran and Rickon, and says, "This is what happens when people disobey me." And he just raises up these two burnt bodies of two kids and says that this is Bran and Rickon, and like I don't know about everybody else that watched the show. When I saw this, I don't think I could have hated Theon more than at this moment when I thought that he'd killed Bran and Rickon. I was so furious at him. He was just such a scummy person. And then we later find out that he did not kill Bran and Rickon. He killed just two farm boys, which is still awful. But I guess, we don't know the farm boys, so I guess we care less. But it's still awful. But we find out that he did not kill Bran and Rickon, but he's still like really feels bad about what he did. And so basically, unbeknownst to Theon, the Boltons surround Winterfell, and he doesn't know who it is. He just knows that there's people that have come and surrounded Winterfell. And Theon has this like kind of heart to heart with Maester Luwin, who is like the Maester at Winterfell. And Theon just kind of opens up and talks about how he talks about like, do you know how like hard it is to tell because like Maester Luwin tells Theon, Ned was always good to you, and he's like, oh, everybody always loves reminding me about how kind my captors were to me. And you kind of like, even though you hate him a bunch, it's like he was a prisoner at like a really young age, and like he did it. It's hard to say rightfully so because we know how like awesome the Starks are, but like they did take a little kid prisoner away from his home. Even though you could argue that he had a much better upbringing at Winterfell than he would have had on the Iron Islands. Anyway, long story short, Theon's crew sells him out, and they give him to the Boltons. Theon then goes through probably some of the hardest scenes to watch in the entire show, where he begins to be tortured. His mind is messed with by Ramsay Bolton, and it's just horrific. And just like literally 5 minutes into Theon's first torturing session with Ramsay, you go, okay, however much I hated him, it's okay. That's enough. We can stop, because Ramsay is an evil person, and he breaks Theon mentally. He breaks him down so hard. And if you are unless you're some sort of sadist, you very quickly feel like Theon has got what he had coming to him, and now everything after that is just like, oh my gosh, this is awful. Because you do hate Theon at first, and maybe you're not super mad that he's getting tortured for like a minute, for like maybe 30 seconds, and then he starts getting tortured. Like, oh gosh, this is awful. And then there's I feel like a really powerful scene where Theon, in one of Ramsay's mind games, lets Theon think that he's escaping, and Ramsay, who's like disguised as someone that Theon doesn't know who Ramsay is, and he's basically talking to Theon, trying to get some information from him. And he mentions something about his father, like what his father made him do. And Theon goes, "My real father lost his head at King's Landing," implying that Ned was the father to him. And he is just really kind of opens up in this little instance with Ramsay about how he just hates himself for how he betrayed the Starks, and just how bad he feels about it. Quickly, this turns out this was Ramsay just playing a mind game on him. He basically just breaks Theon down to the point where he just assumes the identity of Reek. That is what he refers to himself as. And he like just literally he gets so broken. And then he is basically Reek for a large portion of the show. And when he kind of breaks away from that is when Sansa comes to Winterfell, and he sees Sansa. And Sansa is kind of like breaks him away from like what he had become, because he just has so internalized how wrong he did the Starks that like seeing Sansa just like kind of like it's the only thing that could have brought him out of it is seeing a Stark. And so basically Sansa convinces Theon to help her escape, and you have this big moment where Theon kind of breaks away from this, like, in a really kind of, I don't know if heroic is the right word, but a brave moment where he after being so mentally tormented and physically tormented, breaks away from his captors and helps Sansa escape. And he basically, from this point on, I feel like his character arc is a little flat. He has this, scene where he basically goes back to the Iron Islands. Him and Yara, they attempt to, go get Daenerys. They bring Daenerys, to Westeros, and basically then there's a scene where him and Yara, they're like on a ship, and then like the ship gets captured, and Theon has the opportunity to try and help Yara. He does not. He jumps into the water. Very cowardly move. I mean, I guess you could argue that he would have lost his life, but he loses that, and then he has this confrontation with Jon Snow, and Jon Snow feels like Theon apologizes basically for what he did, and Jon Snow is very, very upset with him. But Jon Snow basically tells him, like, Ned was as much of a father to you as he was to me. He's a part of you, just like he's a part of me. And Theon basically takes this really to heart, goes, rescues Yara, but then as soon as he rescues Yara and makes sure that she's safe, his request to her is like, hey, I want to go fight with the Starks to defend them from the White Walkers. I know I'm cutting out like huge chunks of the story, but I'm just, trying to focus on Theon and the important parts of Theon. Yara says, what is dead may never die. She gives him her blessing. He goes, and then he dies defending Bran. In his Bran's final words to Theon were like, "You were a good man." There are obviously people that would debate that, but it does. Him dying defending a Stark was really the only way that his character, I feel like, could end, given everything that he had done. And I like the ending. Could some of it have been executed better? Sure. But I feel like Theon is such an interesting character in just the way that we go from hating him, and he is probably one of the most hated characters aside from like Joffrey and Ramsay. As far as like a character who like we're supposed to like maybe at sometimes, Theon is probably one of the most hated ones, and justifiably so because of all the horrible things that he does. But I just find it so interesting how Game of Thrones was able to make us have this person who we hate so much and then feel so bad for him through the torture that then we can have some semblance of rooting for him again. Like after Theon had those charred bodies raised that I thought were Bran and Rickon's at the time. I mean, I would have never thought that Theon was someone that I would root for at any point in the show. But I do in several instances in later seasons. And I feel like that is a really impressive character rehabilitation. And everybody loves to talk about Jaime the Hound. I think that those are better character rehabilitation, but I think it's just such a testament to the show that like we have this kind of really small character rehabilitation, like, or not small, it's a good one, just kind of also in the show, and it really gets overlooked because of all the other quality characters. But I actually do feel like Theon is a really cool dynamic character, gets overlooked a lot, partially because he is just so hateable at times, but he's really interesting, and I hope you guys enjoyed this kind of examination. If you guys disagreed with anything I said, please leave a comment down below, but if you enjoyed this video, make sure to like and subscribe, and have a great day.